Hey guys, we are here. It's bright and early Saturday morning if you're in our local time, but if not, it is Monday. It's Friday night over there. For we have a special guest, Mr. Max Brooke. How are you, Max?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Enjoying the afternoon. Days are getting a little longer here, so it's the sun's not quite down by 4 p.m. yet, which is nice.
It just came up for us over here. Uh, we also have Joseph. Welcome, Joseph.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here.
In Japan, who is like even earlier than me. Have you got your Boss coffee? Oh, no, not Boss, the Boss coffee. Oh, it's too early for me. We also have wonderful Matt. How are you, Matt?
Good, thanks, Norby. You made me get up early on a Saturday morning.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was complaining. I told him 9 o'clock, and turned out to be 7:30. But we're here, and of course, it's me, Nobby. We are here to discuss 2.5 rules. They've come out. They came out Wednesday for us, Tuesday for some of you, Tuesday night for some of you. And like I've only just had tipped the iceberg on reading through them, but we're going to go through and have a look at these changes that have happened. Look. For those who don't know, which I'm pretty sure everybody does, Max, give us a little quick intro about yourself.
Sure. My name is Max Brooke. I'm a freelance game designer, but my claim to fame and the only reason people would want me here is I spent a number of years working on X-Wing. So I was a designer on X-Wing from late first edition through, I guess, pretty much the end of second edition. And the last couple products I worked on are trickling their way out. So still very much involved with the community.
I thank you also for taking your time out to join us this morning. Joseph, tell us a little about yourself. You've had some involvement into X-Wing in the past as well, haven't you?
Yes, I have. I started playing X-Wing when the core set came out and waited for the Y-Wing and TIE Advanced to come out. I've been playing for a long time. I was invited to playtest for X-Wing around Rebel Aces, and I playtested up through the beginning of 2.0. So you can find my name in a number of credits. I've been playing casually and competitively and working here with the scene in Japan. There's a few other great players up in Tokyo, as Tsukuda Joe. We had a chance to have a Japan X-Wing team for XTC this year, which was a lot of fun. So we've enjoyed the game for a very long time.
Awesome. And Matt, one of the teammates for our trilogy tournament. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's been playing since the last wave of 1.0. Maybe the second last wave. So not quite the experience that a lot of other people have, but it's still been, 4 or 5 years now. I guess a lot of that was through COVID. But yeah, sort of enjoy X-Wing competitively, and wish there was more competitive events, big events down in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the same boat. So I joined. I think I started just a little bit before Matt. For those who don't know, I love A-wings to no end. Best ship in the game. Thank you, whoever designed the A-wing, because it's good stuff. But I've been playing end of 1.0 and competitively, probably the last two waves of 1.0 dropped. I missed just after the Ghost Fen era, but I've been playing probably way too much X-Wing most of 2.0, and as of today, still have not actually played a game of 2.5, but that's what we're here to talk about. So it is a brave new world with the rules come up. Now, just clarification, I have not actually gone into depth into scenarios. I have only skimmed the scenarios, which we're going to be talking about today. And I believe you are all the same. Is that right? We were chatting about this and we thought we were going to do this detailed live, so you can see, the reactions, genuine reactions as we review this. This is why it's kind of like a little bit rushed. And I do apologize. There's less prep work than I normally do for these episodes. So I do sorry, and a big shout out to Shane Monk for organising this and throwing this all together. So let's go. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. So let's not hate these new changes just right off the bat. Let's see how they go and see what they're going to do in the effect of the game and keep an open mind going into this. This is probably addressed to me and some of you out there, but we'll see how we go. So, objective of this discussion is to not criticise X-Wing, but look at the strategies and stuff for the new new rules and environment. Now, me and Matt are quite competitive in nature. We do like to kill each other in many different ways. So, and we also like to see from your perspective how these changes are going to affect. So that is why we're here. All right, key rule changes. This is just what's going to basically be happening. Don't know about these pearls of wisdom, but we'll try and do some good stuff. We have the key rule changes first. Let's go into it. So, for those who don't know, Rogue changed everything, was announced November. Is that right? About November. And they introduced the random player order. Now, first question is, was this ever considered, this is going to throw the first one out to you, Max. Was the first player ever thought about when you're talking about the initial design? Is that okay? I should have asked this question beforehand, but I didn't think about it at the time.
That's fine. I can talk about this, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we explored all sorts of options for how to deal with those things, and I think the important thing to keep in mind when considering pretty much all changes to any game between editions, is sort of like, you can see from what the game rewards and punishes, sort of the behaviors it wants to incentivize. And you can see from that, maybe the designer's intent, maybe not. Sometimes people don't realize what their games are incentivizing, although I think AMG definitely has a good understanding of that because, I think they have a clear vision for X-Wing. So you can take a look at this. So, where we were at the time, our goals for X-Wing at the time were very much to, sort of like keep 2.0, as it was, as it sort of appeared to be. I think the 2.0 that existed is pretty close to the game we intended. And so we didn't want to shake up player order in a big way. It absolutely was something that we knew some people didn't like, and we definitely did experiment with alternatives. But ultimately we found that if the game was going to stay the type of game it was, with that very focused, dogfight-oriented, sort of like chess-like approach, then changes to player order were neutral at best, and many of them were more exploitable than the current solution, which was sort of the best bad solution. So it's sort of like how in chess, going first is advantageous, but I don't think chess has found an alternative where, somebody gets 2 moves in a row or something that makes the game more balanced, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes in a tightly balanced game, or in Magic, being first on the draw is just hugely advantageous, even with the offset of an extra card, or first on the go is hugely advantageous, even with the offset of getting an extra draw. I mean, situationally, but in most circumstances, playing first is advantageous. So player order is a tough problem for tight, competitive 2-player games that are designed around that ethos. And so, yeah, we definitely experimented with other options. We looked into things, but ultimately we just found any other option that we explored was more exploitable than the system that existed. Now, interestingly, I will say, again, AMG clearly has a vision for the game, and the game has a different strategic and tactical outlay. You're looking at a different set of problems. So changing player order in that circumstance could actually make a lot of sense, because the game isn't necessarily asking you to do the same things or think about the board the same way. One of the big problems with changing player order in first edition, Frank talked about this all the time, is that it made the board state almost unanalyzably complex. But by having a randomized player order, but also making the game care a lot more about your general positioning of your units, rather than the tight positioning within your formation, or the tight positioning, where a few degrees is really key to winning and losing. If most of your points are being scored on objectives, then it actually makes a lot of sense that player order could work in a different way, and it wouldn't create this sort of analysis paralysis problem. For the same way that, in 40K, the most important thing is like, where are your units positioned? Are you going to be able to capitalize on the objectives that will win you the game? And yeah, sure, killing your opponent's stuff helps, but it's not the main objective. So the level of like strategic versus tactical thinking, the way the game is set up, all that has a huge impact on that. So basically, long story short, we did experiment with other options. They weren't right for the X-Wing we were making, but this very well might be a very good option. I'm sure Atomic Mass tested it and has good reasons to do it the way they did.
Yep. Great answer. Thank you. Joseph?
Probably longer than you wanted, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Joseph, anything on Road? Because you're testing in 2.0. Have you? I'm assuming that you would have played in the last couple of months with some Road games.
Yeah, I've played Road a few times. I think for the dogfight game, Road was a really, really bad idea because it made things really difficult. I really would have preferred before dials. But seeing now the objective-based initiative, instead of having to care exactly where your opponent's ships are going, you're looking a little bit more at where you're moving your ships in terms of, I'm going to go after this objective, I'm going to switch from this objective to targeting that ship, or I'm going to switch from this objective to a different objective. And where you're going to move, you have a lot more options than you would when you're, say, facing a pure dogfight. Because in a pure dogfight, there's usually kind of a best move. And you and your opponent can kind of figure out what that best move is, and blocking becomes a thing. And Road, all of a sudden, you don't know if you're going to be able to make that block. But here, you're not just thinking about a single individual, I'm going to try and make this best move. It's, well, maybe instead, it's better for me to go over to that objective, and it's really unlikely that my opponent can even bother blocking me if I move that way. And random play order starts to impact less, especially after the dials, than it would in the pure dogfight situation. So I personally never really liked single perfect player order being behind in initiative all the way through the game, and I did like the way that Road allows you to change back and forth. Unfortunately, I feel it's a little bit too random. But I don't think it's going to be as big of an impact as we had been worried about in the last couple months.
Yeah, I'm going to echo your thought when I get to it. But first, Deering, would you like?
Yeah, so kind of similar thoughts. So I've been playing Road for a couple of months now, so pretty used to it. And most of the time it's fine until you've got that one turn where you've got your match initiative ships facing off. And you're both sitting there going, oh, what do we do now? So I'd say most of the time it's fine until it's not, and then that whoever wins we'll say gets the road roll they wanted that turn. Goes, thank you, dice luck.
Yeah, but
I think. Oh, go ahead.
You go, Max.
I was just going to say one thing to consider in that too is just that again, as was pointed out, with the objectives in play, it may not be that important to guess exactly where your opponent's ships are going to be. Frankly,
that is very true. So I haven't played any objective games yet, but sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like 1.0 and 2.0 X-Wing were a game of guessing where your opponent's going to put their ships, and that might not really be part of the game going forward. And I think people should sort of think open-mindedly like that, of like, do I even need to do that anymore? Maybe I don't. That might not be what the game's about.
Yeah.
I agree with that, because the just having the objectives in I think 3 of the scenarios have 5 objectives, and 2 have 1. So with the 5 objective scenarios, you're going to want to be spread out over the board, and so you're going to have more movement options. And is it your I6 might be trying to prey on their I3 while their I6 is doing the same to you, not necessarily them facing off against each other.
Yeah. No,
so it is going to matter less with objectives, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's the you don't need to focus where your opponent's going to go anymore, because they're generally going to be going towards the objective, right? I mean, it's like the objective's over there. Like, they're going to have to go over there at some point. That's where they're going to go. It's a lot of that is going to be reduced. So it's more about less about guessing and working out where your opponent's going to be going, particularly, but trying to play around the objectives more. I think again, none of us have played any of the scenario play yet. This is just our hot take.
Actually, I managed.
Except for you, Joseph. Sorry.
Yeah, I managed to get one game in the other night, but I've only played one game of the first scenario so far.
Which one was that? Which one you said the first scenario? The dogfight one?
The very, very top scenario in the list, it's the assault on the I forget what they're called, satellites. Yeah, the assault on the satellite array.
Yeah. We'll touch on that. So okay, Void. Initially, I was a little bit worried, but I got to say, I was. I'll be honest with you, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I was more concerned about the effect of list building, taking away some of the lists that would be that need to move last. But I never was a big person, so I was always used to moving first or moving second, depending on who I faced or what I was facing. So I didn't take me too much time to adjust, but I will say I did list build around the road factor. So now that's going to be changing again because we're changing the scenarios. But yeah.
Yeah, but before we go on to that, just one last thing about Road. Are we going to be, is Extended still using missions, just all of the ships? Or are we completely scrapping the, pure dogfight mode? Because pure dogfight mode, I don't think Road is great still.
We'll get to that when we talk about the scenarios, but basically with the new rules, it's one of the 4 scenarios. So there is a dogfight scenario in that, but it has an objective in it. The old 206, I think the standard term for the form of the game is basically gone, based on the rules. But it will always have a place. It's not gone until you've not played anymore, really.
Yeah, we'll probably still be playing it.
Yeah,
Extended's not really the game mode that's going to be supported by MG anyway. They'll be playing Standard, so Extended will only get played when the TO decides they want to do Extended, and they could do scenarios or no scenarios for that. I'd say that would just be up to your TO.
Yeah. Organise things, which is also another point I will get into a little bit later. But so the move went from 200 points. We actually went from 100 points in 1.0 to 200 points, which I really liked that change. The give you more flexibility on the scoring when you did to 2.0. But now we've gone from 200 points to 20. So this meant that ships have a smaller point value, but they had loadout points as well, which meant for upgrades and things. There's an article by AMG about that, but how's everybody feeling? Like hot take when they see this change. I have some words, but I'm gonna leave that to last. Am I okay to do it, Max? Have you seen that?
Well, so let's talk about it from a design standpoint, because I think that's the most interesting perspective and the one I enjoy the most. It is a big shakeup. It's a really interesting one. It feels a lot like quick builds, and definitely plays in that same space. And there's a lot of interesting potential there. I mean, I haven't looked through the loadout options, so I don't know what's available. But it is a really cool opportunity to create some thematic combos of oh, hey, let's give this ship the ability to take this character, but only under this circumstance or whatever. These 2 people can fly together. That. There's some really cool, fun options you can do there. And again, looking back to 40K and other war games, the ability to be oh, this character can take this special relic piece of equipment. There's a lot of fun options there. So from a design standpoint, it lets the designers do a lot of cool things and open a lot of avenues. Obviously, from the player standpoint, it's going to create a much more circumscribed experience. You're going to get sort of, you're going to have the options you have. There are pros and cons to that. Pros, you won't have to face certain obnoxious combos. Instead of having to try to figure out some way to, remove slots or point up something, it'll just be oh, okay, this ship just doesn't, Fenrau just doesn't get the ability to have afterburners or whatever. On the con side, though, you can't do as much list building and combo building. There isn't as much to do. So, like the focus of the game will become less about that. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing just depends on how much you like that or not. Obviously, a lot of games live in the list building. I would actually say, in many ways, like most miniatures games on the market live in the list building. 40K certainly does. Like, it almost doesn't matter what you do once you hit the table. At that point, you're just drinking a beer with your friends and, rolling armor saves.
Yeah.
So, I think, in many ways, this is a shift from a traditional paradigm of minis games that's at least very interesting and will certainly shake up the way lists are built.
Absolutely. Joseph, you've had the most 2.5 table time.
I've built a few lists, and so far, most of the ships seem similarly costed to 2.0 in a lot of ways. Like, if you think about a TIE Defender being 70 points in 200, divide that by 10, you get 7, and we're seeing it as a 7-point ship. So the overall effect is that you're really just taking away some of the tweak points in balance of, I think this ship should have been 72, so there's no 7.2 anymore. So I think it's going to be a little bit harder to balance some of the ships, and it looks like their hope is to fix that with the loadout options.
Yeah.
I don't really like it, but I do know that it's a lot simpler to solve the math points of like how many points have I destroyed at this point, because I'm no longer trying to do like 73 plus 28 in my head, which, that's not very hard for people who can do math. But if you're drinking beer and having pretzels, like figuring that out, you might need a calculator or a piece of paper to remember it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so the 20-point change, since everything is just being scaled down by a factor of 10, it doesn't seem like it's that much of a change. The real change is in the loadout values, which I guess is and the whoever I'm not a big fan of how they did the loadout values and which ships have which upgrades. I'm not sure if we're talking about that yet or not, though.
Yeah, we'll get to it. Just initial points on the It's meant to be a glance at the changes, and thought I'd get everybody's quick hot take on it. Deering, anything like to say?
Yeah. So I guess it's definitely sort of, I guess, initially it creates a heap of interesting list building challenges for us. That could just be because there's so many changes, though. There's
Yep.
so many new exciting things.
Mm.
I am worried about that. Like, we went from 1.0 to 2.0, we went from 100 to 200 to try and get that extra
That sweet
granularity in
spot.
costing, and now we've lost that. So, like, there's some of the power differences in ships at the same price it's a lot higher. And I think the highest, we'll say, if we say 2.0 points, the highest point list we've seen has broken 300 2.0 points.
Yeah.
Which just the addition of those loadout values, and I'm kind of going to lament the sort of customization of, like, do I want a fat ray or a thin ray?
You don't have that now.
I'm hoping that they'll release, is that even if it's the same pilot, you might have so Ray is 8 with 20 something loadout points, but you might get a Ray worth 7 that only has 10 loadout points.
Yeah, I'd like to see that at the least.
So, and then they might change the upgrade slots or something as well, so you can get different combinations.
That's definitely a nice way to go through it.
That would give us some of that list building back, and you don't want to be forced to just sort of pay more for a ship. It would help you tweak to get that 20-point list.
Yep. No. That's actually a very good point. I noticed that a lot of the list, or should I say the factions, have a 2-point list to fill in as a filler, depending so they could tweak to 200. Sorry, could tweak to 20. So I got to get out of the habit of saying 200. But I will say there was one interesting thing, and I think Aaron in our group chat mentioned it. A shout out to that. Is do you remember the Crates Cup we played in, and how we had the sideboard? Like
Yes.
this kind of tool of having the loadout value for the ships is just go, okay, well, at the start of the game you pick your ships, and they each have the values of it, but then you have basically your loadouts that can be changed as you're going into each of the scenarios. I could even see a future where they go, okay, well, you pick your ships, you don't have to have your loadouts built at the start of your turn. You can customize the loadouts based on the scenario that gets drawn, like as an avenue. And because of this change, that actually has the power to be a little bit flexible for the scenarios come. So rather than having to have a list that can handle all scenarios, you just have the core ships to do that. I can see that as a positive to it, but as Max you meant, it kind of feels like Quip Build where you get given a ship, and as you said, the math of it is if you have an X amount of points, you're probably going to be trying to use those loadout points to the best effect. And once that I guess that secret formula is found, everybody will be using it, and that's my biggest worry about that. The downside of this change. But we'll see how it goes. It's early days yet, right? One of the other big.
It may.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh, no, I was just going to say. I mean, the other thing too is the dogfight really is an optimization funnel. It really pushes you to care a lot about value, but it might not matter as much that you get your bang for your buck. Again, depending on how. And having looked at the scenarios, it seems like the fact that some of them score more for destroying enemy ships than others is a little interesting, because that means that sometimes you do want to be able to dogfight. And I suspect scenarios will push more towards objectives and less towards points for destruction as time goes on, would be my gut, just because it is anytime that it is pushed, the game is pushed more towards being a dogfight, you're going to feel those differentials a lot more, right?
Yeah.
As a concrete example, like when Sunfac was really undercosted, people felt it a lot. And that was like too much value on the table, and it really hurt. Or when the Nantex was undercosted, people felt that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Various other lists over the years when something was, especially in 1.0, the Jumpmaster in 1.0 was just way too much value on the table for its points cost. But with scenarios, there may be a significant mitigating effect there, where if you are dealing with a more strategic focus and you are not as worried about, you're not getting as much of your points from destroying stuff. I mean, I could potentially see lists that try to avoid engaging entirely and just score points on scenario stuff. That was very successful in Armada sometimes. It wasn't well liked in the community, but it was quite successful. There were a number of lists that were able to do that, where they avoided engaging their opponent and just scored scenario points. And you could see. I don't think you'll see that in X-Wing, because ships are a lot faster than they are in Armada. It's hard to avoid an engagement if you're moving towards a predictable target. But significantly reduced. It could matter a lot less how much offensive and defensive output a piece has, which is interesting.
Very interesting. Thanks for that. So one of the other changes I had was bumping, and one of the questions that we had on the list that we can ask you was, to start with, was intentional bumping part of the game?
Bumping has a really interesting history. I'm sure I've talked your ear off about before, but I'll do it again for the benefit of the audience. Yeah. It was not really intended at the start of the game. At the earliest origin of the game, the designers, they intended for bumping to occur because they determined that they didn't want two ships to collide and both of them die, which is what would happen in, a more simulationist game. It's like, oh, you ran into each other traveling a large fraction of the speed of light. You're both dead, and so is everyone else nearby, But they weren't going to do that. So the idea was like, okay, well, what if they sort of dodge off and avoid each other? But, we don't want people slamming into each other on purpose because it's weird and unthematic, so let's attach a cost. But by the time Wave 2 rolled around, it was sort of the lifeblood of the game. So it was an organic occurrence that, blocking was very quickly and very readily adopted by the player base. So by the time I came on, blocking was just kind of assumed. It's like, okay, we assume you can do this skill. This is something players will use, in the same way that, in chess, you want to threaten a piece in multiple ways, right?
Yeah.
It's like, obviously at first level, like, chess player, you're like, okay, I'll try to move this piece over to get that piece. But if you're a good chess player, you're not going to do that. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to set up a situation where I am going to get that piece with this or this or this or this, and you can't stop me. And so blocking became a similar thing, where it's like that sort of second order thing, tactical thinking, and like setting up these multiple moves in advance. And so, blocking was very much a design pillar, but it is an emergent behavior, and that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about it, that the designers responded to because players liked it so much. So it's got an interesting history.
So yeah, one of the changes was they I wanted to bring that out because one of the rule changes that they made was that we now have two things that happen with bumps. Is one is you have a ability to take a red focus or calculate action, and the side effect is also that range 0 attacks happen as well, which is part of the offshoot of the bump itself. Does anybody else want to add to that before we move on to that? Joseph?
Yeah, there's also two different types of bumps now. There's friendly ship bumps and enemy ship bumps. So that's adds a little bit of complexity. It looks like they wanted to prevent people from, okay, I'm going to create a fortress because now you'll just bump yourself to death if you fortress. So they're trying to make it so that doesn't happen. But it's like, why didn't they also make it enemy ship bumping possibly takes damage? Because they probably still want you to be able to block your opponent and not be as penalized for it.
I think the main reason they actually wanted enemy ship bumping not to cause damage is because if they tried it even once, I'm sure they discovered how unpleasant it was. Because there's a reason that static discharge array and other things that like penalize your opponent for over penalize your opponent for that were sort of pushed to lesser and lesser significance over the course of X-Wing because they're pretty nasty.
Yeah, no, I can. Sorry, Matt, you go, and then I'll conclude.
Was it in I'll say I played a 2.5 game with no, so we just did a dogfight, and my Defender Vader took 2 damage from a eater that he'd bumped into. So I'm hard against the bumping and shooting at the same time. It just feels like it's a bit more variance based than sort of the rest of the game, per se.
Yeah, well, yeah, the attacks will have no mods in that thing, which also reminds me, you do get mods if you have force. So now that the rules are out, they were talking about that the range 0 attacks don't get the range bonus and that you can't use mods, but they have included the ability to spend force, which maybe means that force has gone up in value. But the actual bumping itself, like I get that there's two. There's basically the self bump, yeah, as Joseph mentioned, preventing vultures, which I'm not against. Like I'm not against. I think I understand why they made that change, but I think it's also had a big impact on things like formation flying. Because now if you have one bump and then cause all your ships to collide, you could just suffer a whole bit of damage, even though you had every intention of engaging correctly. And also if you get the games where you get just that little bit sloppy and ships start to, not be perfectly aligned anymore, and then you try and do your banks, and then oh no, the one at the back clipped the one at the front by a mil, and oh no, it's a bump, you lose your action, and now you suffer damage.
It's good. I'm glad to encourage our sloppy opponents to fly less sloppy.
Well, there's two important takeaways from that, and one of them is playing online, like on which I don't think AMG is really wanting to notice, but a lot of us use TTS. We're not going to have that imperfect movement that we get when we use our hands in a physical game. And the second one just disappeared from my head. Hang on just a second. The bump chains down your list is not guaranteed damage. That's the second point. Is you're rolling a die, so you might get damage, which is a little bit more randomness for.
Well, you also lose your action as you did the 2.0 ways. But whereas if you're bumping your opponent, you do get an action. You just to get your focus. I mean, it's. I feel it also takes away a little bit of the whole bumping ability that was basically, I guess, not quite a foundation, but it's been since the early days. And as you mentioned, Max, that as a player base, enjoyed the mechanic. Right, so that's kind of been taken away. That's my first sad little point. But I also understand that with scenarios, you're also trying to enforce engagements in particular spots, which means it's easier to get the bumps off of your opponent, because if you know where they're going to go and you're going to have an engagement here, then being able the power to bump is even stronger than it used to be. So this is probably an offshoot because of the scenario play. Everything's changing. The whole reason, or the whole style of play is changing. So this is probably a required change, realistically, to go with the scenario.
It also feels like it's a change that is kind of welcome based on road, because before when you mentioned we don't know which ship's going to go first, and we're in that same pilot skill bit, you're no longer. You're not really penalized because of road in terms of not being able to take a damage bumping into or not being able to take an action bumping into an enemy ship.
Yep. Obstacles, deadly obstacles. They changed the obstacles to I'd say penalties overall harsher. Max, I ask you, what were your thoughts about the obstacles? Not necessarily the change, but when you guys were designing, because you guys had the gas clouds that were introduced in 2.0. Can I pick your brain about like when you thought about putting those into the obstacles? What were the things you're considering?
Yeah, I mean, gas clouds were funny because they'd been in like the development pipeline for a really long time as something we wanted to explore, just having more obstacles, getting more variety into the game. And one of the things we found with gas clouds was like it is people are very attached to the obstacles they have. Like there was a lot of it. I think if gas clouds had been rolled out at the start of the game, they would have been far less contentious, which is always kind of funny. But they're like this different thing, and a lot of people felt like, oh, these are too different from X-Wing the way I like it, which funny given where we are now. But anyway, so I remember there was a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth and sky is falling about gas clouds, and they did eventually need to be tweaked. But yeah, obstacles are, and they're an interesting part of the game. Making them. They were already pretty darn deadly. I'm not sure making them more deadly actually matters that much. As we've seen, making a less deadly obstacle had a pretty big impact, but I don't know how much of an impact making them more dangerous actually has, especially with the lack of tractor interaction. So, I think that one's not going to be felt all that much. You didn't want to drive onto obstacles before, and you still don't now.
Joseph, any comments on that, on the change of obstacles?
I think oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, you go. That's it. Nobody's got us in order.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm going from right to left on my screen, so I know where we're up to.
They definitely are more deadly. I think it might not matter as much. Like when you would go over an obstacle before was to get a tactical advantage in the dogfight situation of the opponent figures there's a smaller chance that you're going to take that route. Now, I think the problem is going to be with objectives. You're going to be able to place these obstacles to sort of block approaches to objectives, and it's going to be really risky to go over them now. So it's going to definitely affect how your opponents are going to move towards the objectives based on where you place these obstacles. I think it's going to cause even more thought to go into, all right, where do I want to place these obstacles? A lot of competitive players were really looking at obstacle placement and turn zero play before, and it's just got even more emphasis now, I think.
Matt, your turn.
I think what Joseph said is a really good point. As ideally, we want like a cheap ship that can sit at one of the the we'll say home or back objectives, and 1-turn barrel roll on top of it repeatedly. So being able to place the obstacle right next to it, or even just 2-turn around the objective, being able to place the obstacles there can force people to have to approach them in different ways. Also, I think the addition of if you clear the obstacle, you get your action. Makes sort of it can give you a reason to do it. So it's if I've got my Falcon and I'm not going to go over the obstacle, I'm going to get shot by they're now sort of 5-ship builds with my 1 agility. Well, it might be worth taking that 1.5 damage going over a rock and then boosting, especially if it means they're not going to have something else to shoot.
Yeah. No, well, the obstacles have more penalty for going over them, but as you mentioned, the additional of the action clearing it is quite like a surprise. It's something that we're not used to. Normally, that's it. You go over the obstacle, you take the damage, but you're stuck over there. So the fact you can reposition.
I do think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say it's something like was it Tiffin belly run and backwards tail slide. The fact that they still have a cost to equip the card is probably something that needs to be looked at, because I'm definitely not going to be using either of those cards.
Yeah, so the one you mentioned, the Y-wing, was allowed to shoot while on a debris
asteroid
or gas cloud. Well, no, could he actually still shoot when on a rock? Because you weren't allowed to shoot on a rock.
Special weapons only.
Special
I think. Yeah. And also, I think we should probably all just be taking gas clouds, because struts sitting next to objectives seems too good.
Did they put struts on the ban list?
No.
Okay.
And they're included on the they are still free, so they you can have a 2-point droid that can just sit on a rock next to an objective.
Yeah, well, the change of the obstacles, overall, I find good. Like, I liked obstacles mattering. I think that's what was, for me personally, that was what made X-Wing X-Wing. Rather than having just a straight open board and just shooting each other, having the engagement around obstacles was what made the game so exciting for me. So it was basically, how to say, what made the game the game. It's that dogfight in trying to get the best angles and best lines. I used to hate just open engagements. I'd always like to have things to fly around, because that's that exciting, like, coming in, doing a 3-bank around a rock, boosting in, and you'd getting as close as you can. That was what made the game exciting for me. So having them matter more was a good thing, I felt. It's why we employed them in our latest in our currently still going event. But the mention of having the actions going over them was a little bit of a surprise, but something I can still see beneficial. I always liked the games where somebody would take that high risk, send a ship right over an obstacle at the cost of, not shooting, taking damage and whatnot, to get the perfect bump on the opponent that sometimes would throw you out. You go like, oh, I couldn't believe you're doing it. But because like that element used to be really, really good, it caused a bump, that would catch someone off guard. The fact that now the bumps matter less means it's also less impactful in the game, and that part I'm also sad to see. So it's kind of like, I guess that's as scales, that some things are good, but some things are bad. All of it's going to change. And especially that now we go to the last point, which is a shift from the dogfighting. So we're taking the game itself is now going away from the classic dogfight and into scenario play, which we're probably going into the next point, which is okay. These are the changes. So we've gone over that kind of thing.
One little note on these changes for players that are looking at this for the first time is on the left-hand side, the last point in blue is really, really important. And if you just read Asteroid and Blaze, you might think, oh, you don't skip your action step if you land on an asteroid, because Blaze tells you skip your perform action step when you overlap it. But the very last point says if you end on any of these, you're going to skip your perform action step.
Yeah.
Which I think it should be in black or in bold or much larger than that. So don't make that rules error.
Yeah, it has to be fully clear going over it, not partially, because otherwise you just end up sad. Especially that the changes are now that if you overlap on any of the obstacles, you cannot shoot. That's probably the other really big one. Unlike the gas clouds and the debris, you used to be able to shoot, and you also I used to love the fact that you could list build around debris, like with Kanan Force. There's a few other cards that Nien can remove stress, so you could go onto your debris. It used to be like unique to certain pilots or certain combos that go, oh, the debris doesn't matter for me. Woo! Well, the crit roll you got to do for it, but that now you can't shoot, so it's really important.
Only with the asteroid and debris cloud, and the gas cloud. But electro chaff cloud, you can still shoot.
Oh yes, you can still shoot. Yeah, they're okay. I guess they're still the rules change with that of them being obstacles or not. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah, the obstacle type matters a lot.
Yeah. All right.
Funny story. Do you know why the electro chaff clouds weren't obstacles?
Why's that?
There was a really degenerate list that revolved around detonating them with seismic charges.
That existed for some time. As soon as they were released as obstacles, that list came out.
That's funny.
Like,
I was going to say probably less of a big deal these days, Although I guess you can use it to shell the obstacles. That's interesting. It's like artillery. It's kind of fun.
What was it? You launch one of those out, then you do a trajectory simulator seismic?
2 seismics you could do because it had a delayed fuse. So the first seismic would remove the delayed fuse, and the second one would then blow it up.
Terrible. I like to say disgusting, but if you ever hear me or Matt talking about something that's disgusting, it's normally because it's like, oh, that's good. So just in case you don't know, if we say that's disgusting, it's normally like, okay, that can be strong and powerful. All right, to the first scenario. Now, again, I've only had a very quick glance at all the scenarios. So if I look like I'm going to get something wrong, maybe I'm sorry. But I believe that I'm the same boat for at least me and Max anyway. Joseph has played probably this one, so he's probably going to be more familiar with it.
This is the one I played.
Seeing as you played it, give us a quick rundown. What is the 5 satellites?
All right, so 5 satellites starts with a satellite placed in the very center of the board. So they had to create a range 1.5 ruler to make it so you could measure to it easily. And then afterwards, you're going to place your satellites kind of in the corners of the board because they have to be at range 3 of the center obstacle, beyond range 2 of each other, and they have to be placed within range 2 to 4 of the board edges. So there's relatively narrow bands in which you can place these obstacles. After you place the obstacles, the objectives, you're going to place the obstacles, so you can kind of shelter the various satellites with asteroids or debris clouds or whatever you bring with you. And what's going to happen is you're going to get points at the end of each round if you have ships next to these objectives, and if you have more ships than your opponent. So if your opponent doesn't have any, you'll get a point. If you each have one ship next to one, you're going to get no points, except if you have a medium or large ship. So bringing medium ships to this will make it harder for your opponent to get points from the satellites. And this happens each round. So if you have a ship next to all 5 objectives and your opponent doesn't, you score 5 points. And you're going to win this if you can have 20 points at the end of one of the rounds.
Okay.
Does that sound? Yeah, that should be it.
First impressions of the game as you played it?
Well, as I played it, my opponent was still playing Dogfight X-Wing, so he brought a list to attack me, and I brought a list that we'll see later on, but I brought 5 ships, he brought 5 ships, we both had a lot of initiative 4. I immediately went after the objectives, and he didn't realize that I was headed just for the objectives and not for him. So by turn 3, I had 10 points and he had 0 points. He was trying to destroy me. I brought a fairly defensive list, rolled pretty well on defense, and pretty much won the game by not attacking my opponent. I had a couple times where I shot, but most of the game I had a couple ships just hard turn 1 left, barrel roll, stay within range 1 of the satellite, and score points. By turn 3, we had engaged in the top left with ships around one of the objective locations, and I still had 3 ships scoring elsewhere on the board. So the game ended up being quite strange as he had to adapt to, okay, now I have to destroy your ships to get points and catch up, but I was able to kill 1 or 2 of his ships, but mostly just score asteroids for 5 rounds, or score obstacles 5 rounds in a row.
Yeah.
The game ended on turn 6.
So one interesting thing this reminds me of, this is a little bit of a tangent. Is it okay if I go on a tangent?
No, go for it, Max. You are guest here. You
During
can do
the-
what you want.
Well, fair enough. I'll try not to abuse that power. During the design of epic battles, one of the things we found really helped, and I wonder if, especially in kitchen table games, people want to do here, was huge ships. Because with their ability to park and do long-ranged attacks, they sort of let you create these fortresses, which mean that you can have, not in the fortressing abusively sense, but in the, like, I'm going to set up a defensive position here, so I can, like, stop my opponent from getting over here, but, you know, with this massive ship, but also I have a big ship that's, you know, potentially a liability if they decide they want to destroy it. But also the fact that they have the long-range weapons means that if my opponent is spreading out, they can't necessarily avoid all fire because I might have a gun that can shoot halfway across the table. And so I think the huge ships might bring some interesting things to this, because they were definitely very, like, integral to the scenarios we designed for epic battles, where it's like we assume somebody will probably have a huge ship, so they're going to be engaging, you know, like at a much greater range than usual, and with, you know, like, and with this piece that can be used as this sort of like anvil. That's not something that really exists in X-Wing otherwise, because everything is moving all the time.
Interesting. All right. Do you, actually, before we get further away from the scenario play, because I also wanted to mention that, like, in, I think it was 1.0 waves, they actually had scenarios in the packages, like as part of the wave itself. Is there anything you'd like to share with that? Like, what were the thoughts that you went into? Because I know that you made some of those.
I did. I designed the one in the Sea Rock in first edition, the little campaign in there. I think I did a couple others. It's a long time ago. So those were interesting. They were very much a legacy expectation. The way X-Wing, you know, was at the time, and the way the player base was at the time, we'd reached out to the player base to try to understand if people wanted them or not, and they were generally not very popular, from what we understood. It seemed like people, you know, a few people really liked them, but it was a small number of people, and most people felt like we should be spending our time designing more cards, or, you know, like balancing the game better, or generally focusing more on delivering a more polished product rather than trying to create these, you know, one-of narrative scenarios. And that's one of the risks of scenario design in games in general, is you want your scenarios to be broadly applicable. You know, like you see what we did in Epic Battles, what Atomic Mass has done here. These scenarios are very broadly applicable. It's not like, oh, you want to play this with a Lambda shuttle against, you know, 3 X-Wings trying to kill it or something. It's like, this is a very open-ended scenario that can get a lot of use. But yeah, the problem was we found very few people played them even once, and among the people who played them once, very few people played them more than once. And they took up a really large amount of design bandwidth. So, you know, like, if I was going to go back and try to put something like that in a product now, I would make them much more open-ended and much more, like, usable, so that people can really, like, enjoy them in multiple contexts, and hopefully try to tie them into, like, OP or whatever, so that there's an incentive to use them. Because, again, just the way the X-Wing was set up at the time, we just didn't get much of a response about them. Again, some people really liked them, and I wish more people played them because they were fun to design, but in second edition we just didn't really think they were worthwhile because the polls we had done and the people we had talked to, it was a very small number of people who played them.
Okay. Thanks for the insight. That was one of the questions I had thought of. Okay, Matt, what do you think? Your impression of this scenario? Any hot takes?
More ships are going to be better. So, as that we've seen the removal of 2 ship lists, 3 ship lists may also struggle unless they're like I think I've seen sort of like a gamut key and boss combo or something, where you're not going to be able to kill them in the 5 turns that the game lasts. So I think a lot of the early reports I've seen are like 4 to 6 turns for the game.
Yeah,
And that's just not going to be enough time to kill many ships, which means it's going to be very objective based.
yeah.
First Order can actually bring 5 medium ships to this scenario.
Oh, 5 Zs.
Yeah, five of
mean-
the Zai shuttles.
You can, but that doesn't mean you should.
I say, is that good?
Well, they've got enough health, and with the loadout, you can give them all gonk droids and just have them gain a shield every other round. They are probably not going to be great at the rest of the scenarios, though. So I don't think you'll need to worry about that in competitive play.
I certainly hope not. If I was going to say, as someone who worked on the Z shuttle, if that does turn out to be a thing, I apologize.
Oh, that's silly. But yeah, and you got double points for capturing, because you're medium base. There could be a thing. Because just quickly going from the deadly obstacles and having more impact, they impact medium and large bases more. So the fact that they actually get a buff to make up for it, I guess a return for the risk of taking them, is that you get more control on the capture points, which actually makes a nice balance kind of sense to it. But the one thing that's really catching me from surprise is when Joseph, you mentioned that the game was pretty much over at turn 4, round 4.
Yeah, it was just a matter of time till I got the remaining points because I had enough ships that it didn't even matter if the opponent killed 4 of my ships. And as long as I had 1 left, he didn't have enough time to prevent the last countdown of 17, 18, 19, 20 victory points.
Wow. So basically you're saying that there's if the game gets run away too quickly, you have no means to turn it around, because that used to be one of the things that really I loved about the game, is that it was never over until it was over.
But the specific match that I played, my opponent didn't rush in. He played like you do in a dogfight, and he was one of those players where on that first turn, you kind of slow roll your ships to try and get a feeling of where your opponent's going to go and what they're going to try and do. And he misread me as coming in as a fast attack and then regrouped to get on the left side, but my ship slowed down and stopped at on the first turn. I was able to get 3 objective points. Yeah. So if he had come in fast as well, he could have gotten objective points from the top 2 objectives. So since he wasn't playing with the mindset of I'm going after objectives, we had a mismatch in ideals, and I think that's going to be something that happens to new players to these missions. Is if somebody goes for the objective scenario and somebody goes for the I'm going to try and blow up your ships and dogfight you, and I think you're dogfighting me, the person who's going after the objectives is going to have an advantage. But if you're both going for objectives and you start fighting over them, I think it's going to turn out to be a little bit more fair and balanced.
Yeah,
I imagine that'll be self-correcting. Your opponent's not going to make that mistake again.
No, that's true.
Yeah, no, but I also like the mind games involved in that, because for me it was one of the things that made that game so good. Is are you going to do that hard 2, or are you going to do a 5k, or are you going to do something else? And no, actually do a 1 bank. I didn't see you going to do that. But you have that element still that's going to be based on the objectives or the engagement that's going to be going for, rather than the positioning. So this could still be interesting. All right, let's get to the next one. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. Chance engagement. So, Max, would you like to have a little readout of this? Because as I say, we're all new here, except for Joseph. Would you like to have a quick read of it?
Sure, yeah. So, you have one satellite in play at the center of the board. Each round, score a point based on how many ships you have there. Looks like this one you get points for enemy ships halved and destroyed. So this is probably going to play a fair amount like a dogfight, but with a real focus on the center of the board. This definitely seems like one where, if I was going into this, I would be looking towards more ships on the table. But maybe there's some interesting stuff you can do with like heavy hitters that you really don't want to be nearby. I'm sure there's some pretty interesting lists. I'll leave that to people who are more up to speed on the list building these days.
Yeah. So this is
just a quick addition is that there's a typo there. It is 0 to 2 for the ships in range of the satellite.
Oh, okay. So 0 to 2. Okay. Yep, I see it. All right, so range 0 to 2 is basically like the center control point. This is basically the dogfighting scenario. Just now that they're trying to force engagement happening in the center of the board. As we touched on beforehand too, that also means that obstacles can't be placed on objectives, which the first thing is that I usually do when I'm setting up my board is have a nice big fat rock in the center of the board. Now we have an objective, so now we have to build around that center point somewhat. So it's already going to impact the turn 0. I think turn 0 is also still going to be quite important, but this is effectively the dogfight. Is there anything you'd like to add, Joseph?
It looks like this one's gonna want you to joust, and as we know from X-Wing, when two lists joust, usually one of them is wrong. So if you don't think you can, if you're not built for a joust, this is going to be a little bit more difficult because one person's going to get into that center, and if you're controlling that center objective for 4 rounds, it's like you've destroyed an opponent's ship.
Matt?
So I think it is only 1 point per turn. So that is it's nowhere near as significant as the other objectives.
Yeah.
So giving up 1 or 2, possibly even 3 turns for positioning isn't necessarily we'll say game ending in this scenario. I mean, that's like if I won a game with an MOV of 150 to 100, then they would be at 130 instead of 100. So it's not as damning in this scenario. I think it's just if they're not going to be able to one straight along just up the side of the board anymore.
Seems like a good one for Trajectory Simulator.
They all seem like good ones for Trajectory Simulator. And actually, we'll save it for the list building.
Yeah. Well, we don't call it trajectory. We call it tragedy simulator because sometimes it's often very sad when you have your opponent has that particular upgrade and they're flinging bombs in your face. But just quickly point out, because if it is 0 to 2 of that center point, you can actually both be in range of that 0 to 2 to stop each other's points but can't shoot. So it's actually going to have a range control is going to be a little bit important about getting in close enough to the objective and preventing that free bonus point for your opponent. Victory point. I've got to get the new terms right. The victory point from your opponent being owned, but it can only do 1 per turn. So it does mean that at least the win condition of getting 20 victory points, it's going to take time. You have to go in and kill your opponent. You're going to have to engage at some point. Otherwise, never going to be open, especially with the 12 turns, which is something else. 12 turns is something they have introduced. We didn't mention that as one of the rule changes. When it came to... Sorry, I'm going to throw a quick question back at to Max. Is originally, what were the end of the game was like when you destroy your opponent, right? That was always like the open-ended rules, but... was a time limit? Because I know a time limit was introduced for tournament play, but never actually at the kitchen table. Was that something like? Did you ever see like a end point of the game or what you're trying to go for when you were in the change to 2.0? Was it the time limit that was?
It was certainly something we discussed. The thing we found was, again, in the dogfight game, putting a hard time limit on it. Really incentivized some lists and made other lists unflyable, and putting a hard turn limit on it really incentivized some lists and made other lists unflyable. And we generally felt that was acceptable within the context of tournaments, but we didn't necessarily want it to be in play for kitchen table games. However, I will say, having again done the objectives in epic battles, I knew I wanted turn limits on those because I didn't want those games going all day, because otherwise they easily could.
Yeah.
And one of the big things we really tried to do in epic battles was make sure that these were, the biggest problem with the epic ships and the epic battles in first edition was that the games took 4 or 5 hours to play, and in epic battles we were really trying to drive that down to a more manageable 2-hour war game experience. And so I think a round limit is a very practical choice in my own experience.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You remind me of the very first epic battle I did in 1.0. With my mate Fong, who'd come in, and we did a two person on two person. We both built 150 points list. 300. It was 300, I think, in 1.0 terms, but we played for 8 hours. That was, yeah. So I totally understand your point about limiting the rounds and everything. I mean, it happened to do that. We were also the first time actually ever playing it, and a lot of us were just doing slow moves against each other. So it took, it took 3 hours before we actually first engaged with all the ships that we had. It was fun. It was interesting, but it took a long time. All right, let's go to the next scenario. Salvage mission. All right, Matt. Would you like to take this one?
All right. So we got 5 caches placed similar to the 5 satellite mission. But the difference now is you don't need to stay at range one of them. You need to have a free action to spend that you don't need to focus or lock or reposition. So you have to spend an action to grab the cache. You can then carry them around with you and run away from your opponents. Any advanced moves, such as your Talon Roll, 4K, or Signal, will drop the cache or slam, and you cannot slam. If you take a crit, you also drop it, and then you just get points. So, I guess if you want to get some fast ships, grab some caches, and then 5 straight boosts away.
You could also do some interesting stuff with multiple turns. Who places the ship when you do a Talon roll or a K-turn? Because it looks like you could K-turn this and then fling the cache range 1 and then have another ship pick it up and K-turn and fling the cache another range 1. And then have your final ship pick it up and drop it off the end like a string of moves. Boop, boop, boop.
So it's because it's an action to pick it up. I guess you'd have to coordinate.
Well, you'd have to have the
pick it up and then before, and then they'd have to do the red move.
So here's one question that the professor says. So you can't advance moves while you're having a cache on. So when does it get dropped? If you do an advanced move, so as you say, the 4K, you're saying it gets flinged. Does it get dropped when they execute the move, so it gets left behind at the start of the 4K? Or you're saying you do the 4K, and then because of the advanced move, it gets dropped at the end of the 4K. So you move it a 4 straight.
Oh, it's like who places it? Does it get placed anywhere at range 1 of the ship? Does your opponent place it? Is that
being placed at range 1 of the ship?
The opposing player places.
Okay, that's important.
Okay, yeah. But you can still move it by doing the 4K. So, as you said, fling it around in some ways. You still get to move it if you need to, but...
That was something we experimented with in epic battles, where generally speaking, when something got dropped, the opponent got to place it, and we found it's pretty hard for it to be advantageous for your opponent to place something. It turns out it's not impossible, but you have to work pretty hard to engineer a situation where it's good for you to give your opponent a choice like that.
So the scenario action says if a ship must perform an advanced maneuver, it immediately jettisons its supply cache. So I'm guessing it's before.
Okay, yeah, they've thought
Well-
of that, which is good.
Well, it's funny because that's kind of like contradicting. So, in one point, Netta in the chat, and also thank you for the raid, guys. By the way, thanks for joining us. So, firstly, like ships may not perform advanced moves. That means you can't dial it in. But what happens if you do dial it in? So,
Well,
advanced moves being will result in
Then
the
you
case
drop
being
it.
dropped. So can you or can't you dial it in? Like the way I see it is like the first line is like you can't, because then if you do, you have to do it two straight, like because it's an invalid move. I mean, this is like I'm confused. Is it legal to put it in a 4K move, or you just if you do, it's considered an illegal move, like you're
No,
at a 4K while
it's-
it's stressed, or is it you do it but you drop the cache?
While it is towing it, it cannot execute the advanced move. So therefore, it drops it and then executes the advanced move.
Okay, so that means it'll be dropped
So
at the start of before it moves.
And the I guess if you must perform one is if you've dialed it in and you now can't change dials, so can't really get around that.
Hey, there's an R5 TK use if you can tractor beam yourself somehow.
Yeah, yeah. Moved. I was thinking actually tugboats. I was thinking. I know that they are also extended, so okay, that we won't. And I always like to see them blow up because I hate them so much. You know, tractor's bad. But I was just thinking of myself of tractoring your one of your teammates. They've grabbed the objective, then you tractor it with the objective and move him away, and so he can run away, kind of thing. But again, that's an extended play. Tractor could be good, but yes, you're right. Friendly fire TK would be good to self tractor. The tractor you can't do on rocks anymore, but doesn't mean you can't, tractor then barrel roll kind of thing. It does say that if you're holding a case, you cannot coordinate your ship. Too, that's a very interesting point. So you can coordinate to do like they can move, take an action like a mod, then you can coordinate to pick up the objective, I believe. But once they're holding the objective, you can no longer coordinate extra actions. So this could be interesting. I could see some list building ideas around this, but this is basically a grab and run. My first impression is fast ships is going to be good. Anyone like to chime in on thoughts on the scenario?
You can grab opponent's ships or the cache from an opponent's ship, right?
No, so you have to make them suffer a crit,
To drop it.
and they'll drop it.
Okay.
Hey, marksmanship gets some love.
Marksmanship gets a lot of love. We got a special card doing it for our trilogy event based on marksmanship. So marksmanship gets lots of love. Just say it. X1s with a free crit, like Darth Vader, the advanced targeting computer. There's a couple of ships that have.
Ned has asked about Ahsoka A-Wing coordinating. I don't think it is coordinating. I think that's fine. You can do that.
I'd have to check that. When you die on advanced move while holding a crate. So yeah, Sonic Rain. That's what we were talking about like 2 minutes ago. Yeah, we think it's going to be that you drop the cache and then you execute because you're not allowed to execute advanced moves while you hold the crate. So you'd probably drop it before you move, then do your 4K. But we to be honest, we don't know. We are interpreting the rules as we see them. All right. This could be interesting. I don't know about doing it like in a competitive sense, but this would definitely be interesting in a fun sense. But this is quite different from the dogfight and also from the first, I guess, like a King of the Hill kind of thing. This is hit and run, and this is going to need different kind of ships that
fast ships are going to be really good here.
Yeah.
And each ship can only carry one cache, so you're going to want 5 or more ships for this.
So that 7 A-Wing list seems pretty good.
Like I say, A-Wings, good stuff. I did actually want to say, do you get to drop the cache off anywhere? Or you just literally hold it, grab it, and run for the duration of the game?
You can choose to drop it.
You can choose to drop it. You can't take it back to your base or something to I'm thinking
No.
of like capture the flag. You grab the flag and then you take it back to your base and you drop it off and you recycle that. There's no return point for this.
Correct.
Just hit and run. Okay. All right. Go for the last one. Scramble the transmissions. So this is also another 5 satellites. Max, would you like to take this one as well?
Sure. Yeah, so during activation, each ship can perform a scenario action to scramble, choose a satellite at range 0 to 1, place one of your markers on it. You roll an attack die if there's an opponent's marker there to see if you remove it or replace it. At the start of each end phase, players each earn 1 mission point for each satellite they control, and for enemy ships destroyed, you get points on your score. So, once again, one of the less fighty ones. You don't get points for half pointing ships. So your focus is going to be more on the mission here. Yeah, this is interesting because this one reminds me the most of the epic battle scenarios. Because one thing we found in the epic battle scenarios design was that having to have ships stay near something was a real pain unless you had a huge ship that's capable of parking. And is very much designed to be sort of a slow piece that doesn't move a lot and fires and engages from far away. So this one kind of gets to avoid that problem where your ships don't need to stay near the things; they just need to zip past them. And that is again something we used a lot in epic battles, where you wanted to have like control of a point, or you wanted to like activate a point once or something. So that reminds me a lot of that design.
So this is to simplify all the words, is basically objectives get placed, ships go past, they plant their flag on and go, this object's mine, and the opponent has to then perform the same action on that same point to fight over it. So this one's interesting because actually initiative is going to matter. Who gets to place the point first, and then who gets the point to plant the flag last. So in some of them it's about just capturing and grabbing it, where low initiative is going to be better. But this one I think is actually high initiative is going to be better because they get to do these. If they're in range of the point, they get to try to capture it after the other person. Of course, if they roll blank, they're sad, but so does the opponent if he rolls blank. But this is more, again, about the objective play rather than killing your opponent. And because you're spending your action to plant your flag, you're going to have less offensive mods. This is again another drive away from engagement and more about your zone. But the other thing is that once you've got your flag down, you don't have to be there. You can move over to another point. So. Anyone else like to add on this scenario? Joseph?
There's some interesting things that you can start to see in terms of all of the scenarios, but in both of these, basically you're placing the objectives kind of in the corners. And you might think, I want to place my objective close to me so that I can get it quickly. But since you have that range 2 limit, you might be able to force your opponent's objective to be a little bit further away from their corner without them being able to place one extremely close to their corner.
Classic 40k tricks.
Yeah. So
objective denial, yeah.
Yeah, so objective denial will probably be a thing in the setup.
Matt, anything?
I guess again, more ships equals more actions generally.
More ships, more actions.
So we're seeing, and it's if you're going to be in sort of fighting, spending actions, it seems to be a trend.
The first thing I notice is that coordinate is going to go up in value as well. Like this is the 4th scenario, and we had the one before it. I think the one with tow, where the extra scenario. I know you couldn't coordinate a ship that's being towed, but you can definitely have them before they do the tow action. So I think the value of coordinate is definitely going to go up, and it's going to be important to factor it in when you are going into list building as well as more ships. That's the first thing that comes to my mind when looking at all these scenarios.
So as an example, like you have someone takes a crit and drops it, but then you just coordinate and pick it up and they run away with it anyway.
How would they get I guess through a bomb? No. How would they get a crit?
Oh,
before
sorry.
this?
During engagement phase, you're carrying one, get shot, and drop it.
Yeah.
And then the next turn, say there's Wedge or Luke, and AP5 coordinates says pick it up at
Yeah.
I1, and
Yeah.
then at I5 or 6 they just run away with it again.
Also interesting is that asteroids no longer give you a crit damage when you go over them.
Yeah, that's another
if you
change.
roll a crit. Debris clouds will give you a crit on a crit. So debris clouds might be good to bring to this scenario because a crit will, or to the previous scenario where it will force you to drop your objective.
All right. What's next on the agenda? Okay, quick summary. So we've kind of touched this considerations, optimal ships. More ships is probably going to be better. Do you think players need to play scenarios or are there going to be different win conditions? So I think fundamentally that the three major scenarios, excluding the dogfight scenario, all of them have quite a substantial victory point for the win condition. You need to get 20 victory points. Now you can completely destroy your opponent to get the 20-point victory condition. However, I think the fact that each turn could potentially go anywhere from 2 to 5 victory points, and it's kind of going to be like a bit of a mix of it both. You're going to want to score some of the victory points for the condition and some of the destruction and make your 20 up through that way because you can't. I mean, your opponent can stop you just getting victory points from the win condition. Sorry, victory points from the objective. Have I read that correctly? Please, someone correct me. It's still early and my coffee's run out. Matt, am I reading that correctly?
I think that was pretty accurate.
Yep. As I touched on earlier, I've heard reports of games lasting 4 to 6 turns. Now, do we think this is going to be normal? My hot take is based on what Joseph said, was that as people get more used to playing the game, that there's going to be, I think, some counterplay into stopping objectives, or at least equaling point for point. I think some objectives could be run shorter if you can't stop the points from being happening. But I think 6 could be the norm there.
There's also going to be some interesting stream games, I think, where objective points like go neck and neck up, and you need 20 to win. But if your opponent also has 20, you actually need one more. So it's possible that you could have 23 objective points each and keep getting the same number of objectives in a turn. So it's there could be some really fun outlier games.
Yeah.
One interesting.
Sorry, you go.
You gotta go for Max.
No. I was just going to say, since like obviously there's going to be a lot of TOs needing to figure out how they want to handle things. I'm curious if. One thing TOs always asked for was shorter games, so that may be good. But I'm curious how much farming out as many points as possible versus differential. What are TOs looking at in terms of the scoring models for not just for a game, but for an event? That's one of the things that I think is going to have the biggest influence on game length. Because if winning as quickly as possible is valuable, then that's one thing. But if you can score more points by dragging the game out longer, that'll, depending on how the scoring works for events, that'll have a big impact.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up. So as AMG has said about transitioning from I guess we'll say was it sort of set total points for a match? So with MOV it's 400 total, and then that just goes up and down between the players to just, if you score more, you get more for both players. So that actually, say in the case of you're tying, well, if you keep tying purposely up till 30, do you suddenly sort of get 30 points towards your tournament's total? And and that's going to
Oh,
be.
do you run the score up at the beginning, and then at the very end, you're both like, oh, let's see who can take this, but we're both going to get optimized. Interesting.
It's like, who cares? We're both going to come 1-2 anyway, because we've essentially played an extra game on top of everyone else.
So Armada had some systems to deal with that in place. I don't remember what they were specifically. Does one of you remember that? But they did deal with this problem.
I haven't played Armada, but I've heard many tales of people being upset about people with less wins having sort of higher placements than them.
I never played competitively in Armada.
I believe Armada, you could not just score infinite points on objectives. Because in theory, if there wasn't something to prevent that from happening, don't quote me on this. It's been a long time since I've thought about competitive Armada. But I seem to recall this needed to be addressed at one point, and there was a solution. So, it's a solvable problem.
Well, one of the things is there's already a soft solution in terms of a 12-turn cap. So you can't push this like, oh, we're each going to get points, and like, oh, it's turn 36, because you could do turns really, really, really quickly.
That's true, but Armada has a 6-turn cap, and it still ran into this problem. So
it's 12 turns is still, if you're getting 2-3 points a turn, plus you kill some of their list, you could get to 30 pretty reasonably.
Yeah. Well, Neto just said in the chat that he's he's about 10 games in. That's impressive considering they came out on Wednesday. I mean, I've had one trilogy game. That's it. But he's saying 10 games in, he's had an average of 5.5 rounds with 30 minutes. So each game only going to 30 minutes instead of the usual 75. Whereas in 2.0,
that's super quick.
That feels really quick. Whereas in 2.0, you'd often, I would say, 50%, 75% we're close to going to time. But in most cases anyway, even when you hit time, there was a clear winner. Like, even if you didn't get to a full destruction, you had a clear winner who had a lead or had an advantage. So this raises a little bit of concern for me, is that if the game goes over too quickly, does it feel like a game? I'm not trying to smack talk or anything. I'm just curious, because for me, I've always enjoyed games that came down to the wire right at the end, and that you had it, as I mentioned earlier, you had a chance to reverse the scores or to make up from being behind. But if the games are going to be over in so quickly that if you get behind at the start, you kind of lost already. Does that make sense? That's what I'm a little bit worried about with the scenario, but we'll see.
I'm also a little bit worried about ties. Since there's a 12-turn limit, it's probably not always going to be the case, but we've seen people intentionally tie before. And X-Wing, we made changes were made, I should say, to prevent tying from happening. But now we can actually end up with tie scores again. Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah,
I think TOs are going to need to figure that out for themselves for the moment, at least. Probably would be my guess. I mean, maybe AMG will roll out something on Monday, but my guess is if you're a TO, you'll want an answer to that question.
Yes, actually, yes. As coming up, planning for the 2020 Grand Championship, which is now, I think, been renamed World Qualifiers, by the way. Absolutely, I've already started looking at how we're going to play these rules, what we're going to be affecting in for the tournament. I don't know. First question I asked, did they release a tournament update document? Because we don't know. The whole changing of the score means that everything's going to change. But I do have one question: is Max, did you guys have to consider like draws and ties when making the game? Like, was that something that you actively thought about, like for competitive play?
Oh yeah, I mean, all the time. We coordinated constantly with organized play. Folks like Alex Watkins and Matt Holland and Jimmy and Wade and everybody. They were always giving us feedback about and they weren't telling us what to do, but they were saying like, hey, events run best if we can do things like this. Events run best if we can, have, this game length or this sort of resolution or all that. I mean, the much beloved, and I'm sure much missed Final Salvo, came out of needing a way to resolve a tie that could not be considered to be gambling. because there was concern that if it was fully random, it could be considered gambling. And it had to have some sort of way that the board state impacted it so that it was skill based and not gambling. And so like there's all sorts of, like just little interesting things, like, interesting tidbits like that. That's going back. But yeah, so yeah, that was absolutely a major consideration, and I'm sure it is for AMG as well.
Yeah. Yeah, shout out to Aaron, our third teammate, who's not here this morning. He won his game through final salvo, through full destruction, not from draw. They both destroyed each other, and they went to final salvo right at the end. So yeah, and when you do that, it's fun. You're like, at the end of a long, hard, fought-out battle, you have a means to resolve it that's still exciting. So final salvo, hey, I've got to say, I think we're going to miss you.
I'm surprised to hear that. When we announced that, everybody hated it.
I won't talk about my XTC where I had a list that was like final salvo was actually almost the best possible way to come into. But yeah, so yeah, final salvo, all right, list building. So we hit on this earlier. List building changed from 200 to 20. So there's talk about standard and extended. So hyperspace is gone. I did like the idea of hyperspace, but now it's just, I think they're resolving standard as being the black box. So anything that's actually been officially released in 2.0. Hopefully this will mean that they will actually re-release stuff from 1.0 that's already been printed and reintroduce them into standard. But they also have a ban list as well, which means stuff that has already been released in Black Box is going to be removed if it's in the ban list, whereas extended is just anything and everything. Except for Delta 7B upgrade cards, because, well, the ship's already been changed over to Delta 7B. So a couple other things that they changed was the dial peaking maneuvers and dial peaking and changing the dials, and default being able to stop when you shouldn't be able to stop. Now, again, I hope this is okay. When it came to your design philosophy, was like looking at the dial and like things like sense and stuff like that. Was that I should check this one. I didn't think of it at the time, but the design philosophy of that was something that you wanted it to be interesting. Like there's also Cassian crew as well. That was always in. Well, I wouldn't say always in, but it was transitioned from 1.0 to 2.0.
Showed up pretty early. I mean, where did Informant show up in 1.0?
I can't remember. They say before I started.
It was already a well-established mechanic by the time I started working on the game. But who knows what additional impacts it might have in like a very different game environment, right? Maybe it is toxic in some way that it wasn't in the dogfight. It usually wasn't all that good in the dogfight, which is one of the interesting things about it. You'd think it would be good, but it actually usually didn't end up being all that powerful.
Yeah. So yeah, that was one of the major changes they did. They wanted to no looking at your other dial, but it's funny because if you had like low initiative ships, looking at your opponent's dial was like didn't do anything. It only affected the top end of the top end of the initiative. I'll keep going to say pilot school, but initiative isn't out. Anyone like to add anything on this before we switch over? Next slide.
Was it you think about like Cassian and/or crew on paper? You guess that you get to look at the dial, and then you possibly get to change your move. That's like on paper that sounds really really good, but we basically never saw it used.
Right, and it's because we usually knew what the best move was, and if you weren't doing the best move, it was usually suboptimal. So you dial in the best move for you anyway. So if they were doing the best move, you didn't need to see it, and if they were doing something else, they probably got punished for it anyway.
Yeah.
And the others, like the Han and Boba, obviously it just messes with objectives.
Yeah.
Really weirdly.
Actually, Han, like Rebel Han would be good because you get the re-rolling of the dice. But Resistance Han's been banned, and I'm really, really sad about that. I would have liked.
Yeah, he might have finally had a use. Poor guy.
Exactly. I mean, he was like Resistance only had one other I6. It was Poe. I I love Poe, but Han was the other big I6, and you used to take him for the big I6 number, not necessarily for his ability, but finally had to use it, and guess what? Nope, he's gone. All right, so we're
Sorry,
not
I
going
had
to go.
to let the dog.
You're right. So we're not going to go into a very in-depth look at list building. We're just going to talk about these changes and what, like, this is just one snapshot of an example. Here we've got the Resistance T70 up on the screen here. So the first thing to note, and I don't think you can see my mouse. No, you can't. Is we have the cost of the ship. So this is the value of equivalent of like 60 points in old points. So, like, for example, Jess is now cost 6. So that's 6 of the 20 that you get given for your list building phase. But you also have this other number here next to it, the loadout points of 16. So she can have 16 points of upgrades onto her ship as part of included 6-point cost. And then you got the upgrade bar, which upgrades can be, which upgrade slots she can fill. Now you can see it's changed and it's different for nearly every one of those X-wings. There's a general standard of a tech slot, a astromech, a mod, and a what looks to be the configuration slot for the S-foils. So everybody's going to have S-foils anyway. And all of them are standard and extended, but we do see a fluctuation of loadout value. So this is the changes that's come through. Is there any like first impressions that you guys see? I have some, but I'm going to save myself to the last. You touched on this a little bit earlier, Max. So do you want to bring that up again? Like,
Well, it creates a lot of interesting space for the designers to play in if they want, and modifying these over time as well. But just to create thematic combinations, and I mean have interesting options where, like, oh, if there's a new comic and like Jess Pava is in it and she does something, they can like add an upgrade to her. So there's a lot of cool like opportunities there to just have a like thematic things that don't like appear on the upgrade bar without having to do like a weird one of exception. It's just like, oh, this upgrade can be taken. Things can just be kind of whitelisted. So from a design standpoint, it has some like pretty fun opportunities, I think.
that I just want to say that's just like Poe is the only one there that can now take the Black One title. Something I just noticed. Like, I was thinking, I saw that Black One is now cost free, it's 0 points. But now that they've put it at free, but they've limited only to Poe being able to take, and only the trigger having Flyboy.
They've done that with pretty much all the titles. They've tried to make it only the pilot that could run it. So there's I think all the Rebel Hawks can still take Morty Crow, and obviously with the Fire Spray, there's sort of the different pilots had their own titles, but they all need the title slot to get their own titles, so they can use the others anyway.
Yeah. Looking at this too, why would you take a generic? Like,
yeah,
I was saving that for the end. Yeah,
it's not even just why would you take a generic. Is if you were going to take a generic, why would you take anything like the Black Squadron Ace compared to the Red Squadron or the Blue Squadron? You're just getting more, and it's better.
And loadout doesn't go against your overall list costs, so we're also not going to see empty ships anymore. It's like every upgrade card is basically free in a way. It still has a cost, but it's into that loadout. But
with like the Blue Squadron Rookie and the Red Squadron Expert, there is a slight, like, you're gaining the initiative value of the Red Squadron, but you're losing a loadout value. So there is a trade-off there. But then the Black Squadron just beats them both. And then you have, why would I take the Black Squadron when I can take Snap or Care?
Well,
like,
there's 3 things I can see in that okay, kind of make sense, but then don't. So the first thing is that, like, the Blue Squadron Rookie, which is I2, has more loadout points than the I3. Okay, so you get the initiative bonus, so you're going to have more loadout value in the second one, right? Because you have, okay, low initiative, you're trading an initiative for loadout points. Okay, that makes sense. But then that gets countered by the Red Squadron Expert having less loadout points than the Black Squadron Ace. It's sort of like, no, actually, no, we're going to give you more initiative and we're going to give you more loadout points, which makes me scratch my head a little bit going, why? But then there's also the fact that, like, the Red Squadron Expert has an EPT slot, but you only have 2 loader points. So that limits you down to, if you're going to use it, you've only got 2 points to put on stuff, which is like heroic or marksmanship, or predator, like, or a 2 point astromech or 2 point tech slot. Like, you're limited only by 2 points to put something on. So yeah, why would you take a Red Squadron Expert over the Blue Squadron or the Black Squadron Ace? I don't know. On the upside, it makes me less angry that I missed out on getting our System Open 2020 Red Squadron Expert. That's at least the upside to this. I'm trying to stay positive here.
From a design standpoint, it's interesting that they could use this to, give the Resistance and the Rebellion, they can focus on characters there a little bit more, and they could decide for some of the other faceless empires to focus a little bit more on the generic side of things. Not that they have, but they have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
That's definitely a good observation. Yeah, that they can. I mean, also, being able to have a curated pool of upgrades really, creates some interesting opportunities for having the things, appear only for certain factions, etc.
Yeah, as we can see, like there's like the Poe and Snap have the double mod, but then the Heroes I Hope versions have the double text.
Yeah.
I say I'm a little less of a fan of some of the changes where they've stuck random cannons and missiles and torpedoes on sort of the one chassis. With the T-70 having the hard point, it's okay. It could take anything anyway. But then with an A-wing, the A-wing can take like one A-wing has a cannon, one has a torpedo, the other has a missile. Well, that's not how sort of A-wings are.
Well, you raise an interesting point there, which is the sort of the question of like simulationism versus like gameism, right?
Yeah.
And the sort of constant battle in games, like how much do you want to pull towards the like simulating a fictional military force versus how much do you want to focus on sort of like interesting gameplay opportunities at the table, and that is just generally a hard tightrope to walk, because you want ultimately the goal for most designers most of the time is you want to create a thematic experience that is also the most balanced and fun, but that can be hard, right? So it's an interesting challenge.
So the perfect example there would be like squadrons. They had to try and balance a TIE fighter with an X-wing, and then later on they added a TIE defender. It was like, how do you sort of balance these while trying and keep it close to the source material and the theme?
Yeah.
And it's probably it definitely creates interesting gameplay opportunities. But yeah, just slight points against the theme, I guess.
I think AMG has built themselves a space that if they keep tweaking and balancing, they can really make some fun objectives, and they can really make the factions feel quite different, and the game can still be a lot of fun, I think. So there's definitely a doorway for a path to keep this better. The shock of the change right now is still overall negative in my head, but I can see this growing into something really, really fun.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Mac, go for it. You get right away here.
Fair enough. I don't.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Max first, then Matt. Matt can wait.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. Well, all I was going to say is just, I think that's exactly right. Like calibrating your expectations is always key to having a good time with the game, right? Like you have to meet a game where it is, and like be in on that concept. And if you are, then you'll probably have a good time. And if you're not, then you might want to ask why you're playing that game, which is a constant battle I have with Warhammer 40K.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, so I was just going to bring up trying to balance the like looking at these costs and loadout values and upgrade bars. Trying to balance it looks like it's going to be a nightmare. I think it might just turn the game into a say, less competitive game and a more, hey, look at all the fun things I can do kind of game, which is fine. It's just it can still be fun. It's going to be a different game to the game we originally signed up for, and it's going to be do we still want to continue playing that game? So for some people, that's yes, and for some people, that's a no. And I guess hopefully the changes attract new players to make up for the people that it's a no.
Yeah. Well, getting in, like, I think also for new players getting into this with the list building, yeah, as I said, we mentioned it at the start. It kind of feels like quick build, which I think were a very useful tool for new players to just pick up and go, oh, okay, I've got this loadout. This is kind of like halfway towards that, is that they pick a pilot and then they basically just fill up the points. There's no more deciding of, do I take upgrades, do I not take upgrades, should I get an extra ship? That's scrapped and it's just gone, okay, pick this pilot that you want to fly and put it down. Which I think, as I say, it's a different way to play the game. It's a little bit less in the list building. I think you're taking away something from the list building, but I would really like to see like a revisit to this. I think this concept is not nearly finished. I think they need to work a formula where they can balance this loadout value with the cost, and that you should not have to ask yourself the question of, why would I take a Black Squadron Ace over? Sorry, why would I take a Blue Squadron Rookie over Black Squadron Ace? To me, that makes no sense. I need more IST to probably. I saw this with some A-wings. You'll see this a little bit later. I was up all night going, why?
Yeah.
And I think right at the moment, AMG is trying to push people towards named pilots because having the heroes in the movies on the table is generally considered better. It's just that this is not only considered better, it is better. So this is going to push people towards particular ships over other ships, and I personally don't like that, and I just hope AMG that retweak the formula to improve that aspect of the game. That's me.
That's actually something we might be able to ask Max about. I know that when I play tested, we often had questions about, like, where should generics be and where should heroes be, and like what kind of balance do you want? Do you?
Oh yeah, that was a huge.
That at all?
I can certainly speak to how we did it. 2.5 years ago. So yeah, I mean, that was a constantly evolving conversation and a complicated one. I mean, when we went into 2.0, we knew that the worst thing that happened in 1.0 in terms of the generic unique character balance was that some of the best unique characters of the setting, the most beloved, the most popular, the most interesting, were just terrible. That was not good, and we knew we didn't want to repeat that. So we definitely weighted 2.0 towards, like, named characters would be good, but there would hopefully be a place for generics. And then over, 2 years of balancing, apparently my dog has decided to come on camera. Okay. Yeah, hi. Hello. Anyway, in 2 years of balancing, hi, yes, hello. We decided, we played with that in various different ways. We buffed generics at various points. We, fiddled with the values of individual named characters. And so, it was a constant, like, ongoing question, and I'm sure it will be for AMG as well. I'm sure they'll fiddle with this too. The dog is definitely MVP. But yeah, it was something we absolutely wrestled with, and we wanted there's a certain type of player who really enjoys this sort of mil sim approach, the military simulator, where they're kind of playing like, I'm going to play a bunch of nameless grunts with like standardized equipment, and I want this to kind of feel like playing a military list, and I'm going to sort of engage with this as a tactical exercise. And we wanted to make sure that that person was satisfied. That was definitely something we were aware of. But we also wanted to make sure that a lot of people who were like, oh man, I'm excited to play Darth Vader, were satisfied. And I would say in 2.0, we probably leaned a little bit more towards, oh boy, Darth Vader, than, the Milsim players. But, we tried to make sure that there were lists that were viable, that were like more generic oriented.
I think they definitely did exist for 2.0.
Sometimes they were quite contentious. I mean, when the generic Inquisitor list was good, people were a lot of people really did not like that. So it was always interesting too. But it was a balancing act. Yeah. Generic lists could overstay their welcome a lot more quickly than character based lists, I think.
That's fair. Yeah. So I think at the moment they've pushed everything towards heroes. Or when I say heroes, names. Like just the way that they've gone through. I think they haven't cracked the formula yet. And that's just something like, it's going to be a balancing act, and I just hope that they will adjust these a little bit. And because the concept can be good, it's different from what we're used to. But at the moment, why would you take a generic? I mean,
droids are still going to be seen.
Oh yeah, droids is droids. All right, let's have a quick look. There's another case here of the Delta 7s. Now. I believe the Delta 7 lost the CLT as well. They removed the Delta 7 configuration in the CLT, and they just made them all 3 attack, 2 shields, 2 agility. I believe there was an errata for all the cards. So just and that's only something I think I uncovered last night. So with that in mind, these changes and these costs, and that's why there's no. With the fact of that is that they've already got the Delta 7B factored in. So the 4 Jedi Knight, so the Jedi Knight at 4 is like 40 points, and you get 3 points of upgrades. Like if I get a Delta 7B configuration in that Jedi Knight, or actually no, maybe it just only got 1 shield. It loses the 2 shields. So it's actually only a 4 hit point rather than a 6. I'll have to double check the errata. Anyway, these changes have already been included into it. So first thing I see is I can fit 5 Jedi Knights instead of 4, which is a good thing. But
that's the CLT one.
That's a CLT one? Jedi Knight?
Yes, definitely.
Are you sure? Because I saw an errata of a card
Delta,
that had
7B Anakin is not 6. No chance.
Well, okay. I think they errated the Jedi Knight to have a 3 red, 2 green, but 1 shield instead of 2 shields. There's a CLT? It's a 7. Don't know. Sorry. Oh no. Okay, we'll skip this. Jedi Knight's too confusing. Sorry, Shane. Bad pick because it's too confusing for me. Sorry, it's too early, and I haven't looked into this, so we'll skip this. But here's the first one. This is what kept me up. This would kept me up Wednesday night when I heard it. Zari and ZZ. Both ships cost 5. One has 15 points in loadout, one has 11 points loadout. So the first question is, why would I ever take Zari when I have ZZ for the same cost with more toys? It's the first thing.
Because you want them both.
Could somebody please give me an answer? Because I've lost sleep over this already. Why? I've had one person say because low initiative is going to be better for some of the scenario play, which I get. Some people have told me that the ability is really, really good, and I actually counterpoint that because actually the rules with the changes with the bumping, because if you look at the rules, is that if you bump an enemy ship, you can only perform that focus action, or the red focus action. You skip your perform action step, which Zari prevents, but it actually has in there you can only perform that one action. So Zari can't focus and boost until they errata her card. She wasn't errated. So, but the loadout here of the 11 versus 15 on a low initiative, I was, scratching my head why. So, if anybody can answer me, please, my sanity would really appreciate it. Other funky things we saw, we got, where is, oh, I miscollected 1 second. Still see that? There we go. The next one.
That's actually the list that I played.
This is the one you played, isn't it? The FO list.
Yeah.
So this list is crazy. This is spam text of 2.5. I think as Max mentioned, when you unbalance it just a little bit, that it can have a big impact to a dogfight scenario. Let me just change this for a moment. Sorry. Bring that back so I can see you guys. All right. So this is one that is actually illegal. This is actually I thought generics were bad in general, but this is one of the exceptions to the case where the generics get a lot of toys for value. How did you find flying this list? Should I rush out and put in an order for 5 packs of the Fury of the First Order? I need to know. I'm asking for a friend. I totally do not have much FO, and I'm willing to buy 10 bombers.
I really don't know. Even though I flew this, I say I don't know because I didn't actually engage in dogfight. I took the 5 ships and we used I jammed myself more than I've ever jammed myself in any of the 2.0 in the 2.0 games that I've played before, just for the extra green die because I wanted to survive. I didn't fire a single cluster missile. I think it would have been way better for me to have not bothered with cluster and advanced objects and had just gone with pattern analyzer
Interesting.
for the objective play itself. The fact that these ships have the one hard turn in the barrel roll was really, really good. The cluster missile threat is really, really neat, and fanatical and advanced optics, when you eventually do take damage, kicks in to let your shots hurt a lot more. So I'd have to play it in a dogfight situation to find out how mean this list really is. But it was quite good for moving around and getting to the objectives. I had no problem getting where I wanted to go, and I had 2 ships that didn't even engage my opponent because they were just, one turn barrel roll over the satellite the entire game.
So, just maybe a direction towards Max, but this list cost in 2.0 terms 285 points. And I think I found with a lot of the lists that have gone into transition into the 2.5 is that the value on the board from compared to 2.0 terms has gone up significantly. So we're seeing like 250, 300 point lists. How did you guys come to a 100, 200 point limit for like versus time? Because what I'm trying to say is we're seeing more points and more tools on the board, so clearly there's going to be more and more destruction happening when the engagements happen because you've got so much more point value on it. How did you come to that magic 100 in the in 1.0 and the magic 200 that you got for the 2.0?
Boy, that's a really good question that I actually don't know where the 100 originated. I'm pretty sure it was not in the core. Maybe it was in the core set. It might have been in the core set. I would have to, that is, I was playtesting X-Wing back then. I think we were playtesting at 100 points. Yeah, I think that was in from the start. I mean, I honestly think it was that 100's a nice round number, and 100 was pegged to, what was it, 5 TIE fighters or something.
Yeah.
And so there was sort of this like TIE fighter standard. Yeah, it's all coming back to me. There was this TIE fighter standard. I haven't thought about non-changing points in such a long time. But there was this sort of TIE fighter gold standard where it was like, all right, well, this is how much value you get. 5 TIE fighters is an appropriate amount of stuff to have on the table, we think. So everything else will be scaled on that. But again, I think value is going to be calculated very differently than it was in in 2.0. I think it's like a units. These TIE Whispers might not be worth 280 equivalent points, but they might also be worth more. One thing about the TIE Whisper that was kind of underrated, I think, not underrated, it was valued appropriately, but the TIE Whisper paid points for how good its dial was. That didn't necessarily actually help it all that much, especially the generics. It was we costed that because it was worth something, but it's worth. I think it's probably worth more now. I mean, you can speak to that. You've actually played it, but would you say that its dial being better now is more valuable than it was before?
I think so. The dial was amazing in the game that I played because I could get to any objective I wanted. It was not hard to choose a path to get to avoid obstacles. I didn't have to worry so much about bumping opponents. I could make sure that I got to range 1 of something or stay within range 1 of something. with all of the moves that I took. So the dial was great.
And that's not even counting Sensor Scramblers in.
Oh yeah.
So
decloak.
turn 1, decloak 5 straight. I'm now contesting your objectives.
You forgot to add the boost in that they can do that decloak 5 straight boost. Yeah, that's yeah. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
gonna get your.
There's
I'm
a
gonna
range-
get. I'm gonna get my objectives on my
I'm
side.
getting my objectives and your objectives as well. Yeah.
Or even if it's just I'm getting my objectives and I'm stopping you from scoring points on your objectives, which means I can get a lead. But yeah, this is all comes down to where stuff with good dials is going to go up in value. And like the loadout, as I say, the loadout's all bonus. Realistically, whether this is going to be the best loadout that we got. This is literally me at I thought it was Aaron, I think, mentioned it, and I looked it up, and I'm just gone. This is crazy. This is a great value 10-point loadout. Is it going to be the best 10-point loadout? I like the point that you said, the pattern analyzer instead of the advanced optics to help you with the objectives. Like there's different variations that can be done, but by all means, like I think everybody's going to be looking at the best, most cost-effective loadouts for the ship, and once it's found, it's going to be like shared around. All right, key questions. We kind of gone over this, so just a quick read of myself. So, okay, I like this question. So, taking into account that players would have to play all 4 scenarios in a competitive event, what areas should players focus on when list building? That's kind of what we've been talking about. The first thing I can say is summarize is more ships. Right? More ships is better. What is going to be the magic number for list building? And actually, I want to toss this out to Max. Is like back in 1.0 days, we found that it was less ships. Like there was a very strong of like having, at least towards the end of it, having less ships with more toys. Then in 2.0, we kind of had having less toys, more ships was kind of the direction that it went, with certain key combinations being key. But what were the average number of ships from 1.0 to 2.0? Did you see a change in the game development phase when you were communicating with the player base for the average number of ships?
It fluctuated. It went up and down. I would say I generally tended towards probably slightly. Well, I mean, I don't know. The Jump Master days are such an outlier, right? That's really dragging down the 1.0 average. Like 1.0 was probably more ship heavy, but then you had your Core and Dash, Core and Miranda, etc. It kind of fluctuated over time.
In early 1.0, a lot of Rebel builds were 3 and 4 ships. And you didn't really start seeing less than that until big ships came on the table. Like Falcon came out, and you still tended to put 2 ships with the Falcon. 2 ship lists were very, very, very iffy in the beginning of 1.0. Imperial builds very quickly went to the Howl Runner Swarm in the very, very beginning of 1.0, and you generally tended to see 5 to 7 Imperial ships. That number slowly reduced as bigger point ships and stronger 2-ship builds became possible toward the very, very end, when you started seeing like Fat Han or Whisper and Rack. I'd say the average was probably 3 to 5 ships for most of 1.0 until the very, very end, when it started to get 2 to 4 ships. Just from my observations of
that sounds about right.
Many
yeah. Well, okay, I can tell from my experience in 2.0, 4 ships used to be the magic number. I mean, that was me. Sometimes 5 depending on you. Generally, if you're going to the 5-ship list, you kind of sacrifice some of your red dice for a bit of the 4 to 5. Then, of course, you do have the factions like Separatist have an 8-ship, like 6 to 8 ships would generally be considered the norm, because it's that faction. So you can't just shoehorn it into saying, okay, 4 ships is the right number. It changes. But I think with the scenario play, the ship count is going to be pushing towards a greater ship count, which the downside is kind of, I feel a little bit like counterplay for the idea of pushing the heroes. So things like Poe being a 7-point ship is going to be counterproductive on the scenario play. It maybe be why they got more loadout points. Who knows? I say it's a whole balancing act kind of thing with this. Next point I'm going to raise on that is, do you see finding the optimal build for given pilot, is it possible that might become a cookie cutter? If you haven't gathered, I absolutely think that is going to be a case, and actually a little bit concerned for me, because I think list building is quite an important part of the game. Without, I get the reason why they made changes, and I think it's going to be easier, but I think it's going to be much like the quick builds that we talked about earlier. Is that the concept is like a quick build, but I found now, Max, I don't know if you can chime in on this or not, but quick builds were for introducing new players to the game to get them like a stepping stone started into the list building phase. Would that be about right?
Yeah, and then once we had them, we used them to do thematic things we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Like, let's put plasma, or not plasma, an ion cannon turret on a U-wing so that Bodhi can fire out the doors or whatever. Fun little things like that aren't like really suitable for the simulation. Fun little simulationist things that aren't really suitable for the needs of the game.
So
torpedo Iden.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
Or having all of the original A New Hope crew riding on the Falcon.
That one was so much fun. When I told everyone I was going to do that, they were like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's just do it. It's going to be a zillion threat level. Let's go."
Hey, but you can do that because it was part of the quick builds, and it wasn't to be taken as the main game. Is that right? I mean, it was just like some, they say, fun ideas that you can toss in. Whereas now we're switching over to this. It's going to be part of the main game. There's a little concern that they're going to, I guess,
start releasing quick builds.
Yeah, going back to quick builds, but going, okay, like we had, okay, this is a story of when 2.0 came out, when we're starting off at the local, we did quick build tournaments. We didn't do the 8 threat, we did like a 5 threat, so we could have smaller rounds and get more rounds in and do like a little mini tournament on the nights. And we have done something similar in 2.0, and it's been fun and interesting. But what I found was by the third event, 75% of the field was using the same quick build threat. They're using Wedge and Thane. And to the point where it got stale really, really quickly. And I'm just a little bit worried that that's what's going to happen with these loadouts. And the fact that people are going to find the best ships and best combos, and then everybody's going to be using it because you don't have the same kind of flexibility that you used to in the list building. We'll see what happens, though. We'll see what happens.
I think it's going to depend.
Sorry?
I think it's going to depend too a lot on how TOs and tournaments use the scenarios. Like if it's if we have to build for all 4 scenarios, then the holy grail of the competitive community is going to be finding the list that is really good at all 4 scenarios. And yep. I'm not sure if there is going to be one because of that single dogfight mode one.
Yes, that's very true. And with TOs, we don't know. I have to make some calls in the coming weeks for the Grand Championship on how we're doing the scenarios. And I'm actually looking. Was it in the rules about how they start the scenarios? It just says 1 of 4. Or pick one of the scenario plays as a way to determine that. And how are we going to have that determined in the actual competitive scene? These are unanswered questions as of yet. So hopefully I have to find it and get find. Hopefully it gets released soon, so we're not guessing. If not, we just have to make things up. All right, final words of wisdom. Max, I'll throw it out to you. Do you have anything for the players out there picking up 2.5? Words of wisdom? Did we lose Max?
It looks like we might have.
Base is not moving.
No, it looks like we might have lost Max for the words of wisdom. Maybe he'll come back and hopefully we can join. I will send him a message. Well, how about Joseph? We start to you.
Well, AMG is going to evolve. The X-Wing game is going to evolve. And X-Wing isn't just a single set of rules. It's our community. It's Fearless Gundarks. It's people in Singapore, Shane Mock behind the scenes. It's the Gold Squadron podcast. And it's international, too. It's the teams between XTC. It's the players. And we're going to still enjoy having a great time pushing ships around and rolling dice. It's Star Wars ships that we enjoy together, and we can still hold throwback events. So we're going to be seeing 2.0 still played. Maybe not competitively on the competitive scene with prize support, but individually communities will hold events. And I think we can have a great time and watch as AMG builds its way into hopefully a better game, even if we're all a little bit scared at the beginning. So long live X-Wing.
I love that long live X-wing. It's not dead till it's over. It's not. But Matt, any words of wisdom?
I really hope they do something. Well, it's not really wisdom. So I really hope they do something for, say, core set based. So let's say, I know, was it when I bought a 2.0, sorry, or was it the 1.0 core set? Housemate and I played at home for a couple of months before we ventured out to our first store. And if people are just going to be playing with the core set rules at home and then they go out and everything's completely different, then that's not going to be particularly good for people entering. That's it. So they need to do something there, and please give us something that's not print and play as well for all of the print and play stuff.
Yeah. So the words of wisdom that's directed to AMG. If you're listening, please release. Like I also spent like a couple of hours looking for my satellites. I can't find them. Does this mean I can't play? I can't play with the new rules. I don't know. But I've also reached out to some people and see if we can get some made up. But I think yes, absolutely, and they need to package it into a kit. You don't want to go and buy an epic pack just to play the scenario play. And I think he needs to. They do need to. Not have printable stuff. I don't want to play with pieces of paper on my board. Not when I've got so much, all the models and the obstacles and cardboard and everything. It just feels so out of place. Ruins the immersion. Let's just see if we. I think.
If it's hot and there's a fan or something, you just blow the paper away.
That's it. In Australia, we got extreme weather over here. Max, I see you back in the group chat, but you're muted. There we go.
Oh yeah, I just had myself on mute because the dogs like to bark at various times, and I didn't want to be spamming the chat with that. Yes, my internet cut out, so I'm joining from my phone. Which is why there's no more.
It's okay.
Visual,
we're winding up. I wanted to ask you: did you have any words of wisdom for the players picking up the switching over to 2.5 and the change, and also new players out there? Anything you'd like to say?
I would just say it's a game. Have fun with it. At the end of the day, the object is to have fun. And figure out what you have fun doing, and approach the game with that in mind. And that can be a tricky thing again. But like, I've never had a worse time with a game than when I was trying to make it something it wasn't. As a player, that when I was trying to play a game the way it doesn't want to be played. That is always a terribly frustrating experience. So I guess my advice is don't do what I do sometimes when I frustrate myself. Look at the game, see the way it wants to be played, try it that way. Come in really open-minded, and then decide based on that. That's my general approach for games. Period. And whenever I've worked on like new editions of RPGs and things like that. And, whenever I do, I always push people to approach it with an open mind, try to let the game guide you to what it wants you to do, and then decide if that's a game you want to play.
Love it. I mean, that reminds me of a saying I normally say, if the game's not fun, well, don't play it. Why are we here? We're here to have fun. If you're not having fun, then find something else to have fun. Right? But in other astounding wisdom, my advice is say, just roll better. Learn to know that the dice there do not hate you. I have to tell myself this all the time. The dice do not hate you, but they actually do. Look, this whole 2.5 is a transition. It is a change. It is a big change. The game is fundamentally different on many, many levels. We've recapped on that. The objectives have changed. it is a changing process, and we're going to have to adapt. We're going to have to make changes to what we normally do, and hopefully we can still find that we still enjoy what we're doing. Some of you may not, and I guess to echo AMG, I'm sorry about that. But the game can still be fun. I think there's a lot of interesting points that they've got there, but I also think they're going to need a little bit of work. They need to make a little bit of adjustments. They're going to be fine tuning. So we're going to give them a few months. I say give them a few months, see how these changes go. Don't just all pick up the broken stuff. All right. I think that the worst point of the 2.0 was everybody was playing spam text because everybody went out to win, and the game became a little bit not so fun because that was something that was identified. We also have to keep that in mind. So if you're going to your local store, don't bring five spam tags and things like that. Try different things. Different lists, and see how it goes. I'm totally going to be trying out the 7 A-Wings very, very soon, the next time I get to play this. But just keep an open mind. See how the changes go, and see where we are in 6 months. With that, I want to have a big thank you to Max for joining us, taking a big chunk out of his time. I really, really, really appreciate it. And also a big shout out to Shane for organising this. And of course, Joseph, I really appreciate your time. And
before we
of course,
sign
Matt,
off, I want to.
he had to wake up a couple of hours early like me and join us. So look, thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. And seeing as my thing is not working, I've got to get the right switch over. All right.
And Nabi, before we sign off,
yep.
I just want to take this opportunity to plug my current project too, which is a board game called Stone Saga that I've been working on with Games. There's a BGG page, and there's a couple interviews we've done. It's a cooperative survival crafting exploration game, so very, very different from X-Wing. I had to make sure I plugged that while I was on here.
No, please. If you got a link, spam the link. Send it to me. Also, I will. I'll put in a link into our Twitch channel.
I'll shoot it over.
Give me a picture too, and I'll put it up in our slideshow for when we start and begin the streams. I'm really happy to support you in this other game. What was it called again?
Stone Saga. One word.
Stone Saga. There you go, guys. Absolutely, check it out. This is a great opportunity to pick up and learn other games as well, because we're picking up new games now. That probably came across wrong. I was referring to being a new game. I just realised that. Sorry, we're learning new things here. We're learning new things here, guys. All right. With that, Joseph, do you want to shout out too?
I guess so. Thanks for. Thanks to my family for putting up with me getting up really early and a ridiculous amount of X-Wing. Thanks to all the players in Japan, and especially Keisuke and Yaokin, who have done a lot of translation work and are going to continue doing a lot of translation work to bring 2.5 to Japanese.
I'm hoping at the end of the year I get to visit Japan, and so we will catch up then. Matt, you don't get a shout out. Sorry, you'll get your turn next time.
That's fair enough.
With that, guys, we're ending up. Thank you very much for tuning in and putting up with us. Have a good day. I was going to say have a good night, but have a good day. Have a good night, depending on where you are.